Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us for episode 3 of the Indo-Pacific series, Aerospace, Defence and Security Technology Market Trends, Opportunities for India, Australia and ASEAN. My name is Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor and Director for My Security Media, and we run this series with our partners, Aerospace and Defence Consultants Association of India, and my co-host, Raman Sapuri, there in Delhi. Raman, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Chris.
Very good. Great to be back, episode 3. In this particular episode, we will remain on our domain focus. We cover aerospace and space, defence and national security, cybersecurity and critical technology, and cities and infrastructure. Just on the protocols, these sessions are recorded. It looks like we are finally live streaming on YouTube, so it's finally worked. It's only taken us ages, and questions can be posted by your chat on the GoTo webinar platform. So if you do have questions, welcome to post them on the channel. And now that we're live, you can even try on YouTube as well. In this particular episode, we're going to cover off on COVID-19 and its challenges. And we have, as always, we have esteemed panel. We have Dr. Amrita Jash, Research Fellow, Centre for Land Warfare Studies, Clause, otherwise, in New Delhi in India. Amrita, thank you very much for joining us. And I think she's on mute, maybe. And we also have Dr. John Coyne in Canberra, Head of Strategic Policing and Law Enforcement, and also Head of North and Australia Security for the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. John, thank you very much for joining us again also.
Thanks, Chris.
Good on you. And as these two titles dictate, Amrita just recently co-edited and released COVID-19 and its challenges, Is India Future Ready? And I'm doing a book review, and I thought, well, it's timely to get her on to our series. And also John co-edited with ASPI on After COVID-19, which was volume 1 in May. And obviously things are moving so quickly. Here we are in August. So we're going to get an update. So slightly less technical than what we normally cover, but definitely we'll get a sort of a sit rep on where the world is right now and maybe the second quarter 4 of the year and how that's looking. Next week, I'm also excited to say we've got a couple of guests lined up for a Space Tech and Leading Trends episode. This will be episode 4. We've got Dr. Suba Rayo Pavaluri, Founder, Chairman and Managing Director for Ananth Technologies in Hyderabad, and Dr. Malcolm Davis, Senior Analyst who specialises in space policy and space strategy, also with ASPI, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. So looking forward to that particular series episode also. Episode 1, we covered Smart Cities Strategy and Public Safety. That is available now on YouTube. And last week we covered off on the National Cybersecurity Strategy with guests from Malaysia and India also. And likewise, these are available. So just as we normally do, just sort of the news of the day and news of the week. RIMPAC finished today, and as I suggested last week, really interesting sort of language being used, very much seen as in the face to China. I thought this is Secretary of Defence Mark Esper's quote, really basically about saying we're here to compete with China, and you kind of also got a sense when Beijing's are firing off missiles at the same time into the South China Sea. So I'm not a Navy man, but from naval sort of posturing, the amount of naval exercises off Hawaii and the South China Sea are definitely something to be monitoring. And again with ASPI, I'm a big ASPI fan, you'd know that anyway in terms of John and Malcolm, but we had Taiwan's president also presented to ASPI, and again some really laying the line there in terms of China and Taiwan's independence. So I see Taiwan as the front line really, and these things kind of just underline that. Some news out of Australia. The Australian Foreign Relations Bill was proposed this week, and also just today, I've just started watching it. I won't be able to finish it today, but obviously Securing Australia in an Age of Disruption, the Australian Signals Directorate and head of making announcements, and ASD are now looking to extend their gambit to allow surveillance on Australian soil also. And we'll touch on that, John, if we can, and your thoughts on these developments on both of these particular bills. From Rahman to the Trump administration to invest $1 billion in quantum computing and AI. Bit of a catch up, I must say, on where China is. And this is an interesting one from Gartner, but the hype cycle for emerging tech. And the orange, there's like two items here that may take more than 10 years. One is biodegradable sensors, and the other is DNA computing and storage. Some space news. Moon to Mars supply chain grants are opening here in Australia. We'll touch on this more next week. $150 million from the Australian government to grow Australian businesses in relation to the international space supply chains. We'll touch on with Malcolm next week as to whether this is enough money, 150 million, maybe not, I would suggest, and grants of 250 grand. It's not going to get much into space, but yeah, we'll cover off on that next week. Some drone news. This is an interesting one out of Finland and Estonia, working on new air traffic management systems to co-locate and share airspace between drones and commercial aircraft as well. Likewise, and two sessions I went to this week. One was with IBM Robo RXN, their chemistry robot. This is now free to use. So if you Google in IBM Robo RXN, you can start to create your own chemical formula, and the robot there in Zurich will make it for you. And it also applies AI and sort of predicts what you will get and adjusts it. Very interesting in terms of drug production, accessible from anywhere in the world. So welcome to give that a go. And I don't know if you tuned in over the weekend with Elon Musk and Neuro Technologies and Gertrude, the insertion of a coin-sized device, I suppose, into the skull of a pig, and they're now seeking FDA approval to start human trials. Very interesting, and Elon Musk and Neuralink have been talking about that for some time. So that's pretty much kind of the news and tech news that I monitored and Rahman raised during the week. And I just want to fly through some events before we dive into this particular session. One is the top Indian women influencers in security. We touched on them last week with Vandana. They have now been announced. It's a not very good clear image, but if you just Google top Indian women influencers in security, you will see the winners there. We touched also on the top women in security that is now open in terms of the website. Nominations will open on Monday, so I'll mention that again next week for Malaysia. Tomorrow, Shemaine Tan and Toll Group's Chief Information Officer will kick off episode 1 of their Blackout series and leadership in crisis times, and again touches on COVID-19 and where we are in a cyber scenario right now with these logistics companies and the like, and how they're adapting to COVID-19 and related cybersecurity risk. And we touched on some podcasts. I've just today released our session with Fortinet on episode 3 of the 3 sides of cyber, talking about compliance. We also touch on the Australian cybersecurity strategy implementing a new accreditation program for critical infrastructure in Australia. So if you're in that supply chain, you've got some cybersecurity accreditation frameworks coming your way. On Thursday this week, we've got the IBM Security Virtual Summit, ASEAN 2020. We're in the final throes of inviting people to that. So if you're in the ASEAN 6, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and the Philippines, you are welcome to register if you have a cybersecurity role. And there's a couple of webinars on our channels in relation to that particular summit, both on the cost of a data breach and then also the cyber breach game review for IBM Security. And just finally, we're partnering with the Australia-Israel Chamber of Commerce this is on the 30th of September, direct linked into Silicon Valley, just looking at the global venture capital investment and its impacts with COVID-19 as well. So you can imagine much of that venture capital money will be moving into the tech field, and how that's impacting capital raising also. So that's enough from us. Any other updates that you want to raise, Ramon, before we start off on our discussion?
No, please carry on.
Beautiful. Okay, so I'm going to do an introduction. I've done an introduction in terms of Amrita and John, and I've kind of given the background. Let me just briefly read out Amrita's profile, just briefly. But she holds a PhD in Chinese Studies from the Centre of East Asian Studies, School of International Studies in Jawaharlal Nehru University, and her doctoral thesis was China's Perceptions of Japan, a study of historical memories as an agency, 2002 to 2012. Fascinating, Amrita. And you are also a graduate. You received a graduate fellowship from the University Grants Commission, and you've done field trips, obviously, to China and the like. So you've obviously esteemed research fellow, also with, I don't have it in front of me, was it Oxford University as well?
Cambridge University.
Cambridge,
I was a visiting fellow at Cambridge.
I knew it was one of the two that I was guessing. Thank you very much. And Dr. John Coyne, Head of Strategic Policing and Law Enforcement, Head of the North and Australia Security. And you've kind of coined that, John, in terms of the North. It's been looked at before, but thank goodness someone's looking at it. I don't have your full profile in front of me, but you'll be hitting the 30-year mark alongside with me, mate, ex-Australian Federal Police, and a true academic, if I can say that too. So look, let me just give a sit rep where we are, and Amrita, I'm going to hand over to you to discuss COVID-19 and its challenges. Is India future ready? And I think maybe just cover off on where Claus was thinking in getting this book out. I realised you wanted to get something in text by June or July mid-year in terms of the sit rep from reading the book. And it's, as you know, at the time, India is now being recognised as the world's fastest growing country in terms of COVID, which is not good news, obviously, but that's the current situation. So if I can hand over to you to maybe introduce the book, the types of things that you covered, and yeah, then we'll move into a discussion. I'll hand over to John and we'll move into a discussion. Thank you.
Firstly, good morning and good evening to everyone who's joining from India as well as Australia and the world across. And I would like to extend my gratitude to Mr. Coverage and Mr. Sopori for giving me this opportunity to reflect on the book and specifically offer an Indian perspective as to how India is dealing with the pandemic. As we all know that, you know, this is something which is like one of the biggest shift or the catalyst that is bringing about one of the biggest systemic shifts in the global order. And we are already talking about a post-COVID world order. And everything changes, the factors, the elements, the new powers, because now we see that the old ways of looking or assessing power, be it the military budget, be it your economy, be it the number of nukes you have, it has completely failed because it is the major and the most powerful countries that has been most humbled by the virus. And the smaller countries rather have seen the best of examples with their futuristic mindset and so use of resources in the best way possible. Now, coming straight into the book. The book is an output of the thoughts given at the very time that how the Wuhan epidemic was unfolding, because there was already a concern because of the proximity we have and to China. So it was that, you know, can there be a spillover effect? So that was, till that time, the pandemic has not been, the epidemic didn't transform into a pandemic, because it was only on 11 March that the World Health Organization declared it to be a pandemic. So there were concerns raising. So we were tracking the issues, tracking the events that were unfolding, especially in Wuhan, and then you see how the effects, the spillover effects, given Japan being the first country first country and a case outside of China noted on 15th of Jan. And then given Japan's high rate of high elderly population, we are thinking that Japan will fall a biggest casualty. Howsoever, the gamut was completely changed. We see the shift of epicenter to Europe, in Italy, then Iran, then United States. So things like there was a continental shift. Rather, the proximities didn't get affected. The offshores got affected given their geographical distance to China. So COVID-19 lot of exceptions where your permutations and combinations all failed. No one could actually put a finger on where and how about it. So we conceived this book project during that time, where we can say it as a lockdown story, because India entered into the lockdown in March, and that's where we understood that the criticality and what lies ahead. So the mindset, mainly the book orients towards the change in mindset that is needed, because often national security is mainly seen from tangible factors we often associate with territoriality, sovereignty, economy. But the pandemic gave us a wake-up call that it is your human security, your health security, your environment that is looming large, because at the end of the day, the nation is made out of its own people. So your demography matters. It's one of the factors that calls for your capital. So that was one of the big realizations to a world across, that how, if your own people are not safe, then what are you looking ahead or looking for? So this book is completely shaped from a national security perspective. And given the timing that we launched it, the book was released in July, and we saw the events until the end of June 2020. So the scope of the book is limited. We have highlighted certain core issues that are of great significance in case of India in particular and the world at large. So what makes the book a valuable contribution is its approach. As I already stated, that looking at it from a national security perspective, because often a pandemic people will look at human security or different factors, but how do you then get into the entire nation, a region, an international perspective? That was our attempt in this book. So in assessing India's national security, the book has adopted a twofold perspective, where on one end, we looked into the political, economic, strategic environment impacted under the COVID-19 and its implications. And the second is the criticality of non-traditional and traditional threats, because we always say that traditional is, takes an upper hand in non-traditional. But now we are seeing that, there's a reversal. But it also comes with certain caveats, because given the current situation of India, we are fighting with both the fists. We are fighting both a non-traditional and a traditional security at the same time. So this is again an exception, that how you always have to be well prepared and ready at all times, what come may. Again, a realization. So the essence of the book therefore lies in assessing the threats, the challenges, and opportunities that lie ahead. Not everything is that pessimistic, because it offers you a new thinkings, and it's time that we bring about those change in our thought process. And in doing so, the book has a very holistic approach, because it is divided along 9 chapters, wherein 9 authors belonging to both the military and the civilian fields have looked into it from their experience and expertise. And therefore, the key facets that have been examined in terms of what India needs to prioritize are human security and environmental security in its national security, followed by economic growth and sustainability in national policy, self-reliance as the key to success. We are already seeing our Prime Minister Narendra Modi's policy of Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is the self-reliance policy. taking a decisive role in global arena. That is India. It's time that India takes up its position at the global high tables and not take a reluctant position, but rather become much more proactive. And I think so there is a global demand as well on that, India getting up or getting more proactive with its roles. Reappraisal of India's military thinking, because we are seeing, the adversaries that we have. We need to change. There's a high, the mindset needs to be changed, that how you deal with it. The old thinkings are not applying. Then the evolving role of the Indian Armed Forces. So that's what I said, that it's not your traditional security. Now armed forces are also involved in quelling the non-traditional risk, wherein human security is no more an exception, but the armed forces are very much involved, because we already saw that India, various missions or COVID hospitals, the fast-track COVID hospitals were actually led by the army institutes or the armed forces. Then comes the long-standing debate on surveillance. Is it good? Because the right to privacy becomes an obstacle for the government to implement, especially in a democratic setup. So then how do you, COVID-19 demands that you have a greater surveillance mechanism, because you are affected with twin targets or multiple targets, that you have adversaries, you have fringe elements, you have domestic issues, that and especially with the humans with COVID-19, tracing. To trace, you have to, it's a way of surveillance. So that everything. So how do you draw that fine line? Becomes very challenging. And finally, use of technology for maximizing security. So these are the various areas which the book focuses on. So it spills over. There's a connectivity, how you join the dots, and that's where our it was our earnest attempt that let's not waste time and give some direction. And that's where our final chapter, that is making India future ready, plays a very prominent role. The recommendation part, because we can't wait for the 11th hour to recommend to the government. And what is important to note is that these recommendations, wholly or partially, are not just limited to India, but can be applied to other countries as well. So I'll just try to suggest few of the recommendations that have been made, like, we looked at from the organizational setup that you need an organizational change, the institutional upgradation, especially because in terms of a national center for disease control, or are you trying to, there's a possibility either you upgrade the NCDC or you create a separate body which is directly controlled and monitored by the PMO. So because pandemics are not going anywhere, it's not fading anyway. If one comes, the other is sure to follow up. That's how it goes. Secondly, because we saw a migrant issue in India, one of our key recommendations was migrant workforce ministry, skill mapping, skill development. How do you absorb them? Because that was a big, social instability that was created. So how do you then restructure it? So you have to get that, you get into a skill mapping technique, and you absorb them into various vocational fields, and like in a most creative way. And then we said that India needs to get an integrated command and control setup, such as data command control setup, also with it can be a lot of national security number. That is, the national security. So then the economic, on the economy front, that we are seeing the biggest hit everywhere, that we are heading towards an economic recession worldwide. But how do you then turn the odds into even? Is we suggested that you have to encourage and strengthen the startups, the entrepreneurs, the banking reforms, demand and purchasing power, and in this, that's where our regional aspect comes in, or the international aspect comes in, where India can actually now take a proactive role in the global value chain system. So because countries are shifting their dependencies from China, China being the world's manufacturing hub, so there is a greater call for diversification, and we see that the most India is rising up in the priority list and as a preferred destination. And India too has made relaxations given the size of land allotment. India is already acting proactive, has been very proactive in its measures in order to attract FDI. Plus, the democratic setup helps, and the will connectivity. Positioning of India, the geography is very important when you have a GVC, and India has a very strategic geographical location. Yes. So I'll just wind up in saying that given COVID-19, we are seeing new areas as well as new thought process, and one of the looming concern is of that of bio warfare. Is that looming large because we saw the catastrophe that the pandemic brings? So can an adversary use it for its own purpose? So these are the things that are cropping in mind, and we have to be all time ready for every obstacle that comes our way. So on that note, I will end for now, and then I'll take up the discussion and the following questions on the same. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and I think you've done a great job of highlighting, well, I suppose the PETS aspect, political, economic, technical, and social, and then also the SWOT analysis. And I think as I introduced John, and looking at the piece of work that ASPI's done on Volume 1, John, it looks like you did the same thing. This is has put the world in flux, so you've got to look at every aspect now. Maybe talk us through the work that ASPI did putting this together, because again, it's an all-discipline aspect. And did you do something as simple as a SWOT analysis and a PETS analysis and start from there?
Thanks, Chris. Look, first and foremost, I want to thank both yourself and Raman for the invitation. I feel deeply honoured to also be on a panel with Amrita. I think that and to be talking the same sphere on India and comparing it with Australia. Number one, in the current environment, when we're talking Indo-Pacific, that couldn't be more important. So these sorts of connections between Australia and India. But I think in terms of more broadly national security, it's important. So what we did is, I do a great deal of warmth from listening to Amrita, and that is that we weren't too far off the same mark. So being a think tank, our approach was Peter Jennings and I got together and we looked across our various strongholds. We have a very broad institute around national security, and we invited people to write chapters, and we said around roughly 30 authors, 28 chapters. We gave them very, in some sense, specific guidance. So what we wanted was something for the policy person that was fast and easy to read and get access to. So what we did is we said, you've got 2,000 words to write us a chapter. Your writing instructions were that you had to concentrate on being forward focused, and we challenged them all to think big. So it was all about the recommendations, Amrita, and what we did is we really focused the authors down, saying, well, look, try and diagnose what this is. And I mean, in a broad sense, we're the same as you, in the sense that we saw that Australia was already having, at that time in May, some really good initial successes with dealing with the problems of COVID-19 and the challenges. What we saw, though, was about the crisis after the crisis. And we still now, the analysis stands strong, which is we still think that, this is bare minimum another 18 months to 2 years of dealing with COVID, and then we will lead to the period of after COVID. What we thought is that we saw these seismic changes in terms of Australia, in terms of social, economic and geopolitical factors. But more importantly, there was an awakening that the security situation in our region, in the Indo-Pacific, had significantly declined much faster than we anticipated. Certainly, we had a defence white paper in 2016, and by 2020 now we realised that the case was that it no longer represented the situation that we're in, and things had got worse, a lot worse. What I might do is I might sort of just talk to 6 specific topics and just quickly a few minutes on each. And the idea here is that, you know, I couldn't possibly do justice to the work of 30 people across 28 chapters on every single recommendation. But what I can tell you is some of those common themes and some of my pet ones. So the big issue for us was threat and risk, and how that had been changed by COVID. What we saw is that where people kept on talking about an increase in strategic unpredictability in the Indo-Pacific region. Well, this was accelerated over the last 6 to 8 months, and we've seen that in a variety of ways, and Chris has covered some of those, but in a general sense, my concern and the concern of many of the authors was what we call an increased likelihood of strategic miscalculation or operational misadventure, especially in these tense times. So in a very simplistic way, miscalculation, dealing with the fact that the red lines that were so certain during periods of the Cold War and leading up to the last several years, where countries knew the rules of the road, that was changing. So the chances are that someone might push over a red line, especially between the 2 great superpowers in our region who are competing. Secondly is operational misadventure, and I can put that in its most simplest sense, which is with all the pressure and presence in the South China Sea, a 25-year-old fighter pilot from country A will be passing by a 25-year-old fighter pilot from country B and either crash into each other or shoot each other, thereby bringing about conflict into our region. So we saw this massive change. We saw a need to challenge the assumptions that have underpinned our national security environment for the last decade to 2 decades in the Australian context. And you will see the direct evidence of that in the Australian news. You will see an increased awareness over the last month in terms of Chinese foreign interference, specifically, and foreign interference more generally in our legal system and in our universities, and a massive questioning around sovereignty in our nation and resilience. And I think this has been a real wake-up call in terms of that. And what we saw, which is my next point, what we saw from COVID-19 is that our reliance on global supply chains and just-in-time manufacturing and our complete faith for many years in globalisation was somewhat unfounded. So in the sense that when push came to shove in an emergency, Australia couldn't produce its own personal protection equipment. It couldn't produce and still can't produce vaccines. So there was a major problem there, and this is starting to be addressed. We've seen this in some very big spending by the Americans and by the Australian government in terms of fuel resilience in Australia. On to my favourite, probably Chris's favourite, we've seen a really big change in the transnational serious organised crime frameworks that we're facing. We're seeing a rise in Myanmar as a real global hotspot for the production of methamphetamine, and that's going to have some incredible implications to the near region and to Australia. What we saw is that defence needed to move away from its natural long-term, and this will be very important, Raman, to your members. I think there was a real demand to move away from that framework of incremental changes and incremental purchases and improvements in defence to a need to do real innovation and make those big jumps in technology. And that's only going to be possible by working in those sorts of tech partnerships and industry partnerships. And I think the last point I want to make, and it's certainly a very Australian perspective or problem or issue, is that we're seeing the most impacted upon members of our society on COVID-19. There's the direct impacts of health, of course, and our elderly, but we have a large number of people aged between the ages of 16 to 30 who are economically displaced. They will never have the opportunity because of the economic arrangements or economic context in Australia to buy a house. They're faced with underemployment or unemployment, a higher cost of education, and general dissatisfaction with the inability to travel, with the inability to be upwardly mobile in society. they are ripe, and we've seen this across the Western liberal democracies, which is they are very ripe for exploitation and radicalisation by right-wing extremist groups. We saw this in the UK in the 80s and 90s with the rise as a result of the Thatcher years and the recession there. So we're seeing this resurgence in terms of an internal threat around the possibility of radicalisation. But in all that being said, and I'll hand this now back to Chris because I don't want to take up too much. We want to have a really great conversation, which is that it wasn't all about negatives. The big message for Australia was this is a once in 100 year time to reset our policy settings and change our assumptions. A once in a 100 year chance. It's a chance to really do the sorts of nation building that Australia hasn't seen since the 1970s. And we should be looking at, and it occurs against the backdrop of a time when the cost of borrowing money is at an all-time low. And I think I would like, and it's not very often I like to read references, but it's by Arunte Roy, and it goes a little bit like this. And then I promise, Chris, I'll hand back over. And it's a good one for all our audience. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us, or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you, Raman, for the invitation.
Thank you, John. What I did, Raman, and you would have seen when I did the agenda, was propose 7 questions. Amrita, are you still with us? She's. I think we've lost her. We might have to reach back out to her. Amrita, if you can hear us, I suggest you log out and come back in. Yeah, I think what I might do is I might kick her off and just 1 second, sorry. I don't want to kick everybody. I want to kick her off. Let's hope. No, okay. I'll just. Amrita? No, let me try dismissing her. And okay, hopefully she'll come back. John, what I wanted to do is flip it around, actually question 7, because I think you've raised it in terms of the time that we're actually looking at. And Raman, I think when we did our first episode, you were quite optimistic about a vaccine coming through. And, you know, it's easy to get lost in news of a vaccine. And we're starting to hear it now. Politicians love to know and to give people hope. John, out of that, you know, you mentioned sort of the 18 months, 2 years. That's kind of the realistic. The World Health Organization is saying this is a 2 years at best, and we're only 6 months in. And we are starting to see the cracks appear, as you say, the crisis after the crisis. How long do you think we should prepare? And we'll touch on each of these domains, because I suppose my ultimate question was the pace of change and what we can expect, because you mentioned putting a document out that was fast and easy to read, whereas the structural changes that Amrita talks about, these are big institutions that can't just be changed with a new idea, and you know, people want to hold on to the old. So I suppose 2 parts. One is, how long should we anticipate the impacts of this? Naturally, the immediate impacts, and then maybe the secondary and even the third impacts. And then, is change really possible given the structure of Western democracies and the institutions that control it?
Look, you know what, I really think this has been a seismic change. So I think that we're going to be in an uncertain period for at least the next decade. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean that I'm not a virologist, and I'm not saying that that we won't beat it itself, but I think the impacts of this and how international relations has been shaped by COVID-19. So, for example, a number of countries have learned as a result of COVID-19 already that national resilience will become more important than ever. So there's a lot of talk about decoupling from the Chinese economy. That's going to create opportunities for India. It's going to create opportunities for our. Welcome back, Amrita.
Thank you, Amrita.
Thank you.
So I think there'll be a lot of opportunities in those sorts of changes. I don't think great power competition is going to go anywhere. So I don't think that, at least for the next decade, I don't think, and COVID has impacted on that. We're South China Sea, competition between the US and China, the Taiwan issue, the two systems approach of Hong Kong. These things aren't going anywhere. These are incredibly complex issues. To your other question, which is, we have bureaucracies that are developed on history. My Indian colleagues will no doubt have much more reference to talk about, the depth and size and glacial movement of Indian bureaucracy. But I think it's time for a change, and certainly we're seeing that with politicians here in Canberra, where there's we're hearing this from the public service, which they're really struggling to keep up with the politicians, to keep in front of the policy cycle here in Australia. So the thing is you either continue on the way you are, falling further and further behind, or we have that sort of evolutionary change. I don't think it will be. I'm not naive enough to think that it will be consistent across the whole of the bureaucracy, but certainly we're seeing this already. We saw it in the Australian context. We saw a COVID-safe app rolled out in a matter of a few weeks. Okay, yes. And I was talking earlier this week to the people who rolled that out, and they said to me, John, it was just this is something that would normally take us years to do. So in answer, Chris, I think some of these changes are happening now with the crisis, and we're getting a little bit more agile, but certainly much more change is needed if we're going to roll out of this successfully.
I think we might have to practice doing it. Amrita, while you're away and referring to the agenda, I asked on time. So question 7 was the anticipated time that COVID will be with us. So the actual crisis itself is looking around 18 months to 2 years. And then there's obviously the implications, second and third sort of impacts that this fundamental change is having. And your recommendations refer to a lot of structural change, new departments, new thinking, but we're dealing with Western liberal democracies and institutions that have been embedded for the last 100 years, really certainly the last 50 to 60 years. Is it reasonable for them to change so rapidly? Just I suppose the question is, how much do you anticipate COVID to be running for? Not just the pandemic, but then the immediate impacts on the pandemic, and then can government be as agile as John alludes to? Is the Indian system structured to be as agile as you think it may need to be? That was a question to you, Amrita.
Okay, yeah, I'll just. Sorry for my disruption because there was some logistic issue. However, coming back to your question that you have stated, generally, as you already stated, that it pans as we look forward to an 18 months to 2 years, and
Amrita, sorry, we're just experiencing some technical issues with your
so
connection. Go.
So as going back to what I was saying, that what started as a health emergency, we're seeing that the impacts of health at every theatre, and rather part rejection, great power rivalry is become far more apparent. And China.
What a shame. Amrita, what we might do is just try you back on. Raman, you have any comments that you want to make on that particular note?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, no problem.
Okay, so thanks Amrita and thanks Dr. John. Thanks to all the people who joined in. I had a couple of comments to make on when Amrita was talking. A couple of points. Number one was that the big key question which came to the mind of many countries and many citizens who suffered was, why are you calling it COVID-19? Why not call it Wuhan virus? That was one question. Because other viruses have been named on the space or place of the origin itself. My second query was that what was the role of World Health Organization, WHO, because the date of the crisis was never announced while it was already on. It was very clear now that the news was not released to the public all over the world. Something was up under the sleeve. And how come the Wuhan virus did not spread initially to Beijing or other places in China? It straight away came to Europe and then things of those nature. So the question was, what was the role of United Nations and Security Council? Can we call it a weapon of mass destruction, given the fact there are doubts in the mind of people that it was not a natural phenomena, it was a man-made virus which got released into the market in Wuhan and then spread. So this is a question which nobody is able to answer the question itself.
No, look, I guess, Raman, my viewpoint on this is that the first one is important. I think that about the naming of it, and then certainly we've seen this with US President Trump. My feeling is this, is that the naming of it was appropriate on the basis of how we've named bird flu, SARS, etc. And I think it was entirely appropriate in the sense that we needed, as a globe, we needed and continuing to need China to buy in to resolving this issue and being part of the solution. I think the international inquiry will find the World Health Organization wanting. I don't think, and this is my personal opinion, and for a conversation in an open forum, I think that China was slow to report the problem. Secondly, is that the World Health Organization was slower to call it a problem as well, and I think that really inhibited a global response. To the third point, which is, the evidence seems to be that, certainly I'm not a virologist, so I'm doing it from secondary sources, that COVID-19 was in fact a naturally occurring disease. That said, I think that there are some, separating the mythology of, calling it a bat virus. What can be said is this is a demonstration, and certainly evidence points to this, of the impacts of the illegal trade in wildlife, the impacts of globalization and deforestation, where you've got these we're going into jungles, taking out animals, putting them in wet markets and eating them. So that connection between the most remote places in the world and also the remote places and human beings and communities is getting closer, and that's going to happen more often. We're seeing it more often. Secondly, is the nature of international travel. We saw this with the last Ebola crisis, where rapidly Ebola moved from Central Africa to the US. So this is the nightmare of the 21st century in terms of outbreaks, which is they do move rapidly. And this is the new reality that we face in terms of, and Amrita was talking about this, in terms of setting up the sorts of frameworks to deal with this. And this is, to Chris's point, about do we have the bureaucracy to deal with it? Well, do we have any choice? This is the world we live in. It's going to move much faster than we've ever experienced, certainly in yours, mine, and Chris's. So I think this is where we need to refocus on this. This is a lesson that we need to pull apart.
In Amrita's absence, and Amrita, talk if you can hear us, but in the challenges in Amrita's co-edited book, there was 1,300 or over 1,300 epidemics recorded across 172 countries worldwide between 2011 and 2017 from a WHO report. So over 1,300 epidemics in sort of the preceding 2 decades. The world was underprepared, and I think the rapid sort of travel network around the world took everybody by surprise, including China. The risk, I think, when you call it a Wuhan virus, is by pushing back against China, you're putting them into a corner, and I just hope the world doesn't do that necessarily. We have to re-evaluate supply chains, re-evaluate relationships, but the way the language out of the US, maybe it's more towards the federal election, but they are definitely putting a lot of pressure on China to intensify that contestation, and unfortunately that's where I think that tension will continue to build rather than work through what happened. And I think it would be natural for China to be defensive in the face of sort of the world pointing fingers at it. Naturally, it was always going to come out of China, out of Asia somewhere. The fact that it came out of Wuhan, and if you look at the flights out of Wuhan, it was a lottery. Basically, you know, a lot of people were going to win that number. So it's one of those things of, I think it happened naturally and by accident. What happens after that and what's happening now is, are people taking advantage, strategic political advantage out of this situation? That's the danger, I suppose. And, you know, maybe going back to things like drug trades, we're going to see this in various areas. Humans are, you know, relatively weak in when they're fearful, and they won't make sound decisions. That's my main concern. The longer this goes on for, the longer we have of heightened risk of mistakes being made. And unfortunately, during change, often comes from conflict. So maybe this is just the start of something that we have to go through that's going to get worse. So yeah.
Chris, I have a point. I have a point and a logic. Please correct me if I'm wrong. If tomorrow a country's oil tanker meets an accident and there's an oil spill, and a third country gets affected very badly due to the, you know, damage of the oil spill itself, whom will you hold responsible? It can add to the crisis of the fisheries, the food chain itself. So somebody has to be made accountable that you should not be doing that to the environment itself. Now, in this case, the point which has not taken the attention is Taiwan had come to the conclusion that there is some issue happening in China. But unfortunately, Taiwan never got a membership of the WHO. So that entire subject got put under the carpet. My suggestion for future would be the proper sharing of data and collaboration among various nations. If anywhere in the world there is a epidemic or a virus or whatever it is, we have to share it. India has done it. We have eradicated smallpox, we have eradicated polio, and there will be some more things happening. Today, there are a lot of people dying in road accidents. There are a lot of people dying of tuberculosis, but there's a medicine for that. We are sharing the data itself. So the world has to share the data, and the country which is not sharing the data has to be made accountable for that. And as far as Amrita's point goes on the pushing the economy itself, there are more and more of challenges which are going to happen. The hotel industry, the airline industry has gone. At the same time, there are new advantages which have just come out as a boon. The digital platform economy. The company in India, the Jio, has got the highest investment from Facebook. That has become the fourth richest person in the world, Mr. Mukesh Ambani. So the digital economy has got a big push. The cyber security investment has got a big push. I totally agree with you that yes, there has been people who have been sitting on this. But going forward, I think the world will find a vaccine, but there'll be another medicine required for that. People have no solution for the cancer, but then we are going to the challenge of new discoveries itself. So it's a challenge for the whole world. And I think the United Nations and Security Council has to do something about such kind of disasters. World was not ready for such a disaster, but now the time has come that we have to have better healthcare. India doesn't have that kind of a strong social security or a health security. It's a lesson for India itself. And over to you, Chris, for taking the rest of the series here.
Thank you, Ramon. I think, go, John.
I was just going to say, you know what, I'm just going to pick up. I think that you're right about the information sharing, and I think that's critical. But I think it might be a few steps before this, and I think that in a way, what this was is that we all globally miscalculated in terms of risk. We miscalculated the likelihood, or misunderstood the likelihood of a pandemic, at the same time as weren't worried enough about the consequences. So we had a number of people warning about this. So, and ignored that. And I think this is where, and it goes to the heart of the security problem, a national security problem created by COVID-19, which is we've miscalculated risk. A global pandemic was always going to had the potential of having a catastrophic impact or consequence, and it was already relatively, the likelihood of it was pretty high. We'd seen the indicators with things like SARS and Ebola. So somehow we just didn't prepare for it because we thought globally and individually in each nation, the cost of being adequately prepared, the insurance policy, for want of a better term, for disease, was too expensive. Now, on the other point, which is there are winners and losers in all this in the private sector and in governments. And I think that the winners, it's not just about sectorial issues, Ramon and Chris. I think that this is the winners are people who are agile and moving fast to be with the new opportunities. The losers are people in old industries and not being able to change, either because they cannot change. Like, for instance, no matter how innovative you are, it will be very difficult to change the current situation for the air travel industry, airlines. So that's impossible. Let's be quite frank for the time being. But other industries, we're seeing this. Bunnings in Australia, a massive hardware chain, is doing a stellar trade in Australia and really winning, and they're not a tech firm. So I guess we need to dissect a little on this. And certainly industry does, the winners and losers of this, and what makes a winner in times of crisis.
One thing I wanted to touch on just as we finish up, and it's a shame we've lost Amrita. I've invited her back so hopefully she can join us for some closing comments, was the public surveillance systems. Amrita touched on it, John touched on it in terms of the COVID app, and it's also touched on in Amrita's book, in fact, with the whole chapter on public surveillance from a health perspective. And again, John, from our background in law enforcement, policing, and we're also seeing it now with the Australian Signals Directorate. Once these public surveillance protocols and the like are rolled out, and we talked about potential risk for future pandemics as well, is it likely this is going to impact on liberal democracies? Because it's unlikely to get rolled back. What are your thoughts on the surveillance state coming in as a result of this under the health platform?
Look, I mean, I have concerns in terms of general policing, and I've had this conversation with the Australian New Zealand Policing Association, ANSPA. These conversations around will police, with these extraordinary powers and extraordinary times, be able to go backwards? There's some big question marks around that. I think part of the challenge is that the medical system, in responding to this human security crisis, was sort of incapable in terms of Australia. And I won't talk to India, but I'll talk to the sense of Australia. So what we did in order to harness the full power of government is we securitized a health problem and turned it into a law enforcement problem. Now that may not be the best approach, because a COVID-19, whilst it has national security implications, is not in and of itself a national security issue. And I think these are certainly not in the traditional sense, the way that we would talk them in the same way as, purchasing armoured capability or defence capability. So I guess from my point of view is that I think that was the first critical failure, but I don't think we had a lot of choice. Moving it back will be incredibly difficult. but not impossible. In the Australian sense, it's raised a whole heap of other issues, and one that will be very interesting to perhaps some of Raman's membership, which will be, in Australia, this is manifested as we want data sovereignty. So we're willing to provide. It's interesting. We're willing to provide Apple and we're willing to provide Google all sorts of details about our personal life, but we're not willing to provide the government for a COVID-safe app if that data is stored offshore. So what it's also done is it's a complicated workspace. We're seeing data and data sovereignty will become an increasingly important issue in an age where so much data is going to be collected through public surveillance.
I think, and again, just saving Amrita, you'll watch this later on, and she touched on her introduction in terms of their recommendations. It's for a data command and control centre across India's 1.3 billion population. Raman, maybe your observations just recently on what India is doing in terms of health surveillance, given that you're now into potentially a second wave, but obviously the world's fastest growing COVID country.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. There are a couple of stakeholders in the COVID control and management itself. Number one was the health authorities itself, the hospitals, the doctors, and in many parts of the world, a lot of doctors and nursing staff and paramedics lost their lives, unfortunately. That is something which should have been avoided. And there was issue of how governments reacted to this situation. Having said that, today many cities all over the world have undergone what is called the third wave of infection. And some cities in the world are now going to get what is called the fourth wave of expected COVID-19 onslaught. It's been a cyclic thing going on. India, what they did was they realized that it's going to be long haul, and we stopped total lockdown, very, very strict government lockdown with a lot of support. That had its own challenges also. Then the Indian government released what is called the mobile app. So anybody moving anywhere in any building, he had to show his mobile app. So with Bluetooth technology and other things, you could locate where you have gone. And in case in my own building, if I come in the morning, I have to show my mobile app. It says I'm safe or not safe. If you are not safe, you're not allowed to enter the building. But going back to what Amrita was saying, we have done what is called the mid-term corrections. Many of our cities are undergoing smart city infrastructure. So most of the smart city infrastructure in India, and we have got now the solutions for the surveillance of COVID, command and control. It is part of the smart city. So what Amrita was saying is already being implemented now. Many old cities which were already finishing their smart cities are now adding to the requirement itself. So there is a technology collaboration between maybe some companies in Australia and India to work together. We have got companies from Germany working in it, and we had a presentation on the smart city itself where we showcased by one of our members how the smart city infra is now undergone a rapid change very fast. 100 cities in India are now going to implement by compulsory by law the COVID type of scenario where the health, the security, surveillance is all integrated into one. But what we need to do is that we have to learn from each other's best practices. Israel is now converting a technology, Elbit from Israel has come to us. They are converting the mechanical ventilator into an electronic ventilator at a very low cost. In India itself, a lot of private and government research labs came out. We had no preparation itself. But today, India is in a position to export some of the solutions for this particular technology itself. So we need to, understand each other's plus and minus points. In some parts of the world, we had surplus of, ventilators, and we had shortages somewhere else. So we did not know how to transport because airline was all closed, how to transport it. So there's a need of some kind of collaboration and share the best practices. We can surely discuss with you, Chris, and the team in Australia, how we have evolved these smart city projects by building the anti-COVID surveillance and things of those nature. That's it. Yeah. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah. I think just to wrap up, and it's a shame we've lost Amrita, but the market itself will adapt probably faster than government, and I think government may be aligned to not loosening the regulations, but allowing those regulations to move as dictated by the market. And we've seen that here in Australia as well. Security technology deployed. You know, I temperature testing during, if you're going to the markets or anything like that, facial recognition and temperature checking. So there's a range of different things that are happening very quickly. It's something that we've tried to cover. We covered it very quickly from a tech perspective on our podcast show in terms of those initial impacts. This has been good to do now that we're in August. No doubt we'll come back to and just keep monitoring this as it goes through. And as per our domains, we try to take that kind of not just the tech, but national security and defence, but then also cities and infrastructure, because all of this will be changing and progressing at different paces. So on that note, I think just to highlight, there are publications. We did try to get all of this up and wrapped up in an hour. There's no way we never do it, John, just so you know. We've go over time. But the importance of this one is that there's further reading. There's COVID-19 and its challenges. Is India future ready? By Amrita Jash, co-editor, with VK Alwalia from the Centre for Land Warfare Studies, otherwise known as CLAWS, in New Delhi in India. So thank you, Amrita. She'll be quite upset, I'm sure, that she's been kicked off. It looks like she's offline completely and not coming back on. So our sincere thank you to her, and no doubt we'll try to have her back. But I'll be doing a book review anyway. And to Dr. John Coyne, Head of Strategic Policing and Law Enforcement, and Head of the North and Australia Security ASPI in Canberra, and their publication After COVID-19, Australia and the World Rebuild. Well worth a look, and having a look at aspi.com, I believe. Yes.
.org.au.
.org. Yes. .au. Just type in ASPI. ASPI's getting a heap of media at the moment. Very popular in the region with allies, and not very popular with the Chinese Foreign Ministry. But you know, you have to call it how you see it. And there's a lot more that we'll touch on, and also with Malcolm Davis next week. Also. So look, that's wrapped up our COVID-19 and its challenges. Hopefully that has wrapped up in terms of political, technical, economic and social implications of COVID-19, and it's stay tuned and one to watch. So on that note, thank you so much to our panel for our Aerospace Defence and Security Technology Market Trends Indo-Pacific Series Episode 3. This is available on My Security TV and also the My Security Marketplace. So thank you to the Aerospace and Defence Consultants Association of India, Raman Sapuri, once again. And we'll see you next Tuesday for our Space Tech and Leading Trends episode. Thank you very much, and sorry again to Amrita. Thank you once again. Signing off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No handshakes, only namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste.